What the man?
Welcome back for a review of One Piece chapter 1043. But seriously, what just happened? I have some ideas which I'd like to discuss, but before getting started, let me quickly say welcome if you're new to the channel. I do weekly One Piece chapter reviews, theory videos, and discussions. So if you're interested, please consider subscribing. It really helps this channel grow, and I really appreciate your support. Now, as much as I'd love to jump right to the final scene, let's start at the beginning because there are some really interesting details I would like to discuss in addition to that major cliffhanger. We pick up on the roof where we left off last week, and the narrator confirms what seemed apparent at the end of chapter 1042, that Luffy has indeed lost his fight. Yet Kaido can take no satisfaction in his victory, and as I said last week, immediately turns his rage toward Bowler Hat for spoiling his first one-on-one fight against a truly worthy opponent in a very, very long time. What I didn't expect was Bowler Hat's silent resignation in the scene, as he doesn't attempt to evade, block, or beg forgiveness, and simply tips his hat as Kaido strikes him down with full force. Last week, he expressed envy for Drake's ability to choose his own path in pursuit of justice, indicating he's unable to do the same, but it's unclear at this point exactly what this means. Is he, as I suggested last week, a cyborg like Kuma, devoid of free will, or has he made a Faustian pact with Lord Emu, the devil of the One Piece world, from which there's no easy escape? At this point, your guess is as good as mine, but we see here that his mission outweighs his life, which may very well be forfeit given the force with which he was struck down by Kaido. But if he survived, which seems likely given Oda's track record, I would love to learn more about Agent Bowler Hat in the future. Meanwhile, inside the Skull Dome, with no way to extinguish the raging fire, it would seem things couldn't get any worse, until they suddenly get much, much worse when Kaido, enraged by his unearned victory, crashes onto the scene, demanding Momonosuke be handed over to declare his surrender. This sudden change precipitates a wide range of responses. The Beast Pirates celebrate in the wake of their captain's victory, while the Alliance is rattled, realizing there's no one left standing with much hope of besting Kaido. Yet Nami absolutely refuses to accept that Luffy has been killed, and I love how much bravery and loyalty she demonstrates in this scene as she's willing to defiantly face down Kaido. At this point, I honestly think we should drop Nami from the so-called weakling or coward trio among the Straw Hats, especially when you compare her to Chopper on the very same page. Marco intervenes at the last moment to rescue Nami from Kaido's Boro Breath with the same technique he used to deflect Kizaru's attack at Marineford, which proves he still has a little more fight left in him. Thus far, Marco's primary contribution in this arc has been in supporting Chopper's efforts to cure the Ice Oni plague, but in filling the role of the pheasant analog based on the tale of Momotaro, I wonder if he's still meant to play a pivotal role as the arc approaches its climax. Meanwhile, Law says Luffy's voice has gone out, which seemingly confirms a few things. First, we now know for certain that Law, like Luffy and Momo, can hear the voice of all things. This was already hinted back on Zou, but we now seemingly have confirmation, which suggests this ability is somehow common to those who carry the name D. I won't say that hearing the voice of all things is a power exclusively belonging to those who carry the name D, as Big Mom suggested people from the Three-Eye Tribe can also awaken this power. There was also some indication that Kaido might have this power in chapter 1009. That said, I do believe the Kozuki are D's in all but name, indicated by Odin smiling as he died in the boiling pot. Law says Luffy's voice has gone out, which means Kaido wasn't lying when he said Luffy wasn't just beaten. Though he appears to have bounced back at the end of the chapter, it would seem there's no doubt Luffy died in the rooftop battle against Kaido. On that note, I think it's rather interesting Zoro also came face to face with the Grim Reaper, or the embodiment of death, just a few chapters earlier. While I'm quite certain Oda won't go down this route, it's interesting to imagine that the future Pirate King and his right-hand man may have crossed over into the next life together, a place where perhaps there's no concept of time and space. Through the dilation of time, Luffy and Zoro could have just embarked on a millennium or more long odyssey through time, space, and everything in between. During the momentary instant their voices were extinguished from the mortal realm.
I was gone 60 years. How long was it here?
What? Where did you go?
I don't know, but wherever it was, I am their king now.
Again, I'm sure Oda wouldn't actually include anything like this, but it's an interesting thought nonetheless. Now, obviously, there are some very important implications for Luffy's apparent death and resurrection in this chapter, not the least of which is the messianic imagery, which is fairly common in epic fantasy stories like One Piece. Thus, Luffy may have just joined the ranks of Gandalf, Aslan, Phil Coulson, Harry Potter, and if Lucasfilm allows me to write episodes 10 through 12, someday Luke or Anakin Skywalker as a hero brought back from the land of the dead to see through their hero task to its end. But more on that topic in a few minutes. We next see Kaido continue to rampage inside the dome while issuing his harsh terms of surrender for the samurai of Wano, whom he now intends to fully enslave as laborers in his massive country-sized weapons factory.
And not just the men, but the women and the children too.
I'm working on a longer video exploring the roots of Kaido's motivation in depth, but it's interesting to remember the first words which accompany Kaido's introduction in chapter 795, "The strong live and the weak die. That is the only rule of this world." Kaido clearly doesn't value the liberty of those he subjugates, but that's because he views strength as the paramount virtue. The world of war he envisions is one where strength is asserted as the only governing principle. The strong lord over the weak, and anyone who accepts their place in this pecking order is free to join his pack of beasts. Challenge for dominance is constantly invited, but none quite measure up to the so-called king of beasts, or the strongest creature alive. On that note, the narration box accompanying Kaido's victory includes his epithet King of Beasts, which has a tinge of irony on two levels. In chapter 1042, Kaido told Luffy that winners need no epithet, yet he himself receives one following his victory. Second, based on the manner in which he achieved victory, referring to Kaido as the King of Beasts in this moment strikes me as a bit false. Kaido told the samurai that they were betting their lives and their dreams when they chose to face him in combat, again touching on this recurrent gambling motif seen throughout the entire story saga. This further supports my assertion that Kaido has been imbued by his mythical devil fruit with incredibly good fortune. I recently released a full theory video on this topic, which I will link for anyone interested in hearing more. Now that the tides seem to be turning in favor of the Beast Pirates, Kaido's underlings rush Law and Kid, who force themselves to their feet despite neither of them having the strength remaining to put up much of a fight. At the same time, we see Nekomamushi and Carrot rushing in to join the battle. A few weeks ago, I mentioned the fact that the scabbards have been falling one by one, leaving them each near death's door. At this point, Ino Urushi, Nekomamushi, Kawamatsu, and Denjiro are the only Akazaya Samurai to be relatively unharmed. But that may soon change now that Kaido has joined the battle in the performance hall. I still suspect the 9 scabbards, all being left severely injured, will allow them to fulfill their role as the 9 shadows from Toki's prophecy, whose support in mortal, shadow, or even spectral form may be necessary for Luffy to overcome these seemingly insurmountable odds in his upcoming 4th round against Kaido. In the interim, however, it seems Luffy's friends and allies will band together in an Ura-style battle against Kaido, a scenario which has the potential to allow some interesting teamwork among the Straw Hat Pirates and potentially even new recruits presently in the mix, including Carrot and Yamato. It's nice to see Carrot re-entering the action here alongside Nekomamushi, though I'm interested to see if she will return to stand with these Straw Hats now that they're reunited in the same location for the first time in quite a while. Meanwhile, Yamato is urging Momo to stand by her side and fight. It seems she has climbed out onto his back as she tries to convince him that it's better to fight to the death for freedom than to surrender and live. Yamato's conviction in this scene is impactful, and seems to have effectively swayed Momo to her persuasion. Though it's also important to remember that ultimately he's still a child. Luffy has helped him to take great strides becoming an effective leader, but it's natural that he still has many fears and doubts. Momo and Yamato returning to join the battle against Kaido could be significant on multiple levels. First, this may be when adult Momo assumes his human form, revealing his apparent likeness to Kozuki Oden, which could inspire the samurai to regain their courage and keep fighting. Second, this could also provide the opportunity for the Straw Hats to at last meet Yamato, which could tell us quite a bit about whether or not she's ultimately going to join the crew, particularly as her bond with Momo continues to deepen. Lastly, this could mean the assembling of the Momotaro themed team of Luffy, Momo, Yamato, and Marco in the same location for the first time. Notably, Big Mom extinguished most of Kanjuro's flame spirit as she fell from Onigashima in chapter 1040, but left a small smoldering ember which seems to have averted Yamato's notice. Yamato has climbed out onto Momo's back, indicating she's no longer concerned with her mission to protect the explosives, leaving the last ember of Kanjuro's Kurozumi grudge to slowly thaw the protective layer of ice Yamato created, which may soon yield an unexpected explosion capable of rocking the entire island and imperiling the lives of everyone still fighting against Kaido. At this point, the explosives represent a Chekhov's gun of sorts in the climax of the battle, and now that Kanjuro's spirit continues to burn unattended, there's no telling when it might go off. Now this brings us to the final scene in the chapter and the cliffhanger everyone will be discussing for the next few weeks. Zunesha, eyes glowing in the mist, calls out to Momo and says it hears a sound for the first time in centuries, the beating of the drums of liberation. Signaling that just as Odin predicted, JoyBoy has finally returned to Wano. We then see Luffy, confirmed dead by Kaido, Momo, and Law earlier in the chapter, is now smiling as what seems to be some type of gooey substance surrounds his head. Luffy's grin is also accompanied by the sound effect Nika, which means smile or grin. Now, I don't need to tell you that this scene has some potentially huge implications, not only for the Wano story arc, but the endgame of the entire series. So trust me, I understand all of the excitement, and there's a lot to unpack here. At the same time, my expectations for exactly what this implies are a bit more grounded. I recently released the first part of a video series exploring Kaido's origins and the true nature of his ability. In the latter sections, which I'm working on editing at the moment, I discussed the topic of JoyBoy in depth, but given the events of this week's chapter, it's important to at least touch on those subjects now. So first, I don't think it's at all surprising that Luffy represents JoyBoy's return. I think it's been pretty clear since Fishman Island that Luffy would someday take up JoyBoy's mantle. Inherited will is one of the central themes in One Piece, as asserted by the quote by Roger which accompanied Dragon's introduction in chapter 100. These things cannot be stopped, an inherited strength of will, one's dreams, the ebb and flow of the ages. As long as people hunger for freedom, these things will exist. Specifically, the central theme of One Piece is the pursuit of freedom. Luffy's fundamental motivation for becoming Pirate King is to be the person in the world who is the most free. On that note, Gold Roger, who learned the true history of the world, asserted fate, inherited will, and dreams as the immutable forces which will raise up the champion of freedom the world needs at the right time. But it's also important to remember that in narrative, theme is a question, not an answer. It's an argument explored and a conclusion reached. Roger's assertion must be tested, and that's exactly what shadows of the hero like Kaido, Big Mom, and Blackbeard represent. Lessons from the Screenplay has an excellent video on the topic of theme centered on the film Jurassic Park, which I will link below in the description for anyone interested in more on this topic. Zunesha says it hears the drums of liberation beating for the first time in centuries, which, references to Binks Saki aside, I believe is metaphorical. JoyBoy was the world's champion for freedom during the Void Century, but for some reason he failed, and his crew accepted their fate and left behind their message for those who will someday inherit their will. The willing acceptance and embrace of death in service of a higher ideal is reflected in those who carry the name D, as well as the symbol of piracy, the grinning skull or the Jolly Roger. As the song Binks Saki says, doesn't matter who you are, someday you'll just be bones. As I will soon elaborate on in an upcoming video, I believe JoyBoy was the world's first forgotten pirate king. The reign of the Lunarians from their land of gods atop the Red Wall, long before the Celestial Dragons, coupled with the Age of the Sea Circle calendar, indicates the existence of an evil oppressive force which has been at work since long before the Void Century. JoyBoy, as Pirate King, may have attempted to build a loosely affiliated nation of pirates patterned on the myth of Libertalia, which ultimately collapsed for yet-to-be-revealed reasons. The ambitions of the emperors, Kaido, Big Mom, and Teach, represent dark, mirrored reflections of the world JoyBoy was trying to build, but Luffy has now arrived as his true successor, the one for whom Roger, JoyBoy, and his allies have been waiting for centuries. Simply put, JoyBoy is dead. He was a mortal man who lived a life of adventure and left behind his tale full of laughs, whose efforts to liberate the world proved unsuccessful, but a new dawn is now approaching. I know there will be lots of theories about Luffy reincarnating as JoyBoy, the spirit of the sun god overtaking our rubbery pirate protagonist, the Gomu fruit being a spiritual conduit or a secret weapon with unimaginable power, and perhaps it's disappointing, but I don't have any grand or elaborate numerology-based theory about the real name of Luffy's devil fruit or any of these other topics. As detailed in an earlier video, I don't think the so-called sun god Nika and JoyBoy were one and the same, nor do I believe either of them were actual deities. As such, I think what Zunesha's words suggest is that Luffy is now simply coming to inherit JoyBoy's mantle, his will. Thus, the mini death and resurrection Luffy experiences in this moment is merely symbolic. At most, you could say there's some spiritual phenomena happening on Wano on this one specific night, and JoyBoy's ghost could somehow temporarily possess Luffy to guide him onto the right track, but I don't think this in any way represents some type of permanent alteration or transformation for Luffy into JoyBoy, Nika, or some other thing in between. As for his devil fruit, I addressed this topic at length last week. It would appear that his devil fruit is indeed awakening, but I think it's premature to assume this means the Gomu Gomu fruit is the renamed power the elders were discussing in chapter 1037. If indeed Luffy's power is only now awakening, it's entirely unclear what would have prompted the elders' sudden concern 6 chapters earlier. Up until that point, no one was watching the rooftop battle, and Luffy wasn't doing anything different with his powers we haven't seen before. To be clear, what I was arguing against wasn't the idea that Luffy could awaken on Wano, but that his awakening represents the power the elders were discussing. There are several pieces of the puzzle I still don't think fit. Simply put, I think the fact that Luffy is now awakening is simply a coincidence, and that there is very good reason to believe that the mythical fish fruit is instead the subject of the elders' concern. Natural rubber is harvested from trees as a liquid, so I see no reason to believe that Luffy melting means his powers aren't of the Gomu Gomu variety. If anything, it would seem his awakened abilities will take full advantage of the wide range of material properties exhibited by natural rubber. Thus, gooey Luffy's awakening seems to be perfectly in line with his established devil fruit powers. So I know that many are concerned that reincarnated Sun God Nika JoyBoy is going to descend from the heavens next week to easily strike down Kaido, the world's strongest creature, but I'm personally not expecting anything of the sort. Wano isn't the final story arc. There are still major battles against the other emperors and the world government looming on the horizon, and Oda isn't going to overpower his protagonist. More importantly, the battle against Kaido is far from over, and if my suspicion is correct, then even with awakening, Luffy won't be able to achieve victory on his own. That's all for this week's chapter review. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you want to be notified when future videos are posted, please consider subscribing, and remember to hit the bell icon to turn on notifications. It really helps this channel grow, and I really appreciate your support. But most important, make sure you let me know your thoughts down in the comments.